Hi everybody, I'm Byron Jacobs from D&B Poker.com, and today I'm delighted because we have Alex Fitzgerald with us. Alex has written 2 books for us and he's working on a third, and we love him. He does great work for us. So how are you doing, Alex?
I'm doing fantastic. How you doing?
Yeah, we're all good over here, and it's good to be talking to you. I've got copies of the 2 books that you've previously written for us. This one, Alex's first book, The Myth of Poker Talent. This came out, I think, in 2016. I should know really, but I just checked. Yeah, 2016. And then a completely different style of book, Exploitative Play and Live Poker. This came out, I'm sure, in 2018. I don't need to check that. I know that. So Alex has done these 2 books, completely different styles of book. I'd say this book, kind of the more theoretical one, The Myth of Poker Talent, and then Exploitative Play and Live Poker, geared towards straightforward, sensible advice for players who play live games. Would you perhaps tell us something about these 2 books, the kind of audience you were trying to reach, and what the, loosely speaking, the scope of the books are, and kind of who they might help, that kind of thing?
Sure. So the first book I wrote, that was, by the way, thank you for having me on. This is really fun. The first book I wrote with a much more theoretical framework, with the ideas that had really helped me versus pretty much all players at that time. And I really wanted to write that book, and I was really privileged to write that book because there was a lot of things that when I was younger, I used to look up to certain poker players as if they were Jedi with nitrogen in their veins. And then the more I studied, I realized, oh no, if you actually count the combos and do the math, and it's very, it gets a little complicated just because it can be a lot to hold in your head at once, but it doesn't get beyond basic arithmetic. And just that kind of thing will help you so much at the table, being able to understand what theoretically you can do if you actually count the combinations and you know what the bet sizes are going to do for you in things of that nature. And that really helped open my poker mind. Now, the thing I found out when that book came out and when I was talking with a number of different poker players is that when you're a poker coach, your job is to get as much information to the reader as possible. It's not necessarily to tell them what helped you the most, even if that is very theoretically fun and maybe helps you explore something that's very exciting to you. The whole entire goal is to get as much information as possible to the reader. And something about poker players is I think a lot of them would be working as mechanics or engineers if they weren't playing poker, but a lot of the poker playing public are fans of sports. They work in a myriad different industries. So you have to pick a very different communication style. And when I was doing, as far as I know, I think I've done more private coaching sessions than anybody else on earth, just because I used to do a few every morning. I did that for years and years and years and years. And as far as I know, nobody else has done that. And something I found out is I found that essentially when the S hits the fan, when you're deep in a tournament or deep in a cash game session, you're only going to remember a couple of things anyway. The theoretical stuff is really fun if you're getting really serious and you want to make sure that you have that kind of stuff. I guess the word would be underwriting everything else, undergirding. I don't know how you would put it, but for normal
underpinning
people,
maybe.
Yeah, that'd be a better way to put it. But for normal people, they're going to remember 1 or 2 really big key concepts. And if it's put in normal English or in a way that's a little bit more fun, it's really likely to stick with you. We can all remember a zany teacher we had in secondary school or high school or whatever. And it's really hard to remember the generic teachers just because the phrasing is different. So I started teaching with, okay, this particular phrase should come up in this situation. And my students started doing much, much better from that point on. And that's how I wrote the second book, to be a bit more conversational, a bit more relatable for normal people. And people really seem to enjoy that.
Yeah, that's great, and that's very much how I perceive the scope of the two books. The first one, for the kind of I don't want to say like more nerdy types, but people who love doing that kind of theoretical analysis, they can really get in there and get their hands dirty. And then, like you say, people who just want to know a few simple bits of information that are going to help them, as they get to these tough situations in the tournaments. Now, you're obviously, one of the reasons that we're chatting you today is you're working on your third book. Now, I'm going to put this up on screen. I hope this will work okay if I just share screen so everyone can see the cover. This is the cover of the new book that we have, the 100 biggest mistakes that poker players make. So this is like the things that typically people do wrong all the time. So maybe one of the reasons people would want to buy this book is to understand mistakes that they might be making, because if everyone's kind of doing these things, there's a fair chance that unless you're like a really elite pro, you're probably doing some of this stuff yourself. And also to understand when other people are making these errors and how to exploit them. So one thing that I think might be interesting, is that a reasonable summary of how you're approaching the book?
Oh, that's a very reasonable summary. It's, I went pro practically out of high school. So after 15 years of hanging out in card rooms, there's just certain things you see come up again and again. And if I have a friend that gets into poker and I see them doing these things, the first thing I'm going to say to them over a coffee is, don't do X or do this. And almost every single time they do it, actually not almost every single time they do it, things completely change. And it's such a great idea for a book, because if you could put all those things together, that's an incredible value to anyone who's got a couple of hours to read through it.
I remember when I was, I've done I have a background in chess, as people may or may not know. I've published a lot of chess books, and I'm also kind of like vaguely aware of the bridge market, because we did some bridge back in the day, although I'm not a bridge player at all. But one of the most successful bridge books of all time is called Why You Lose at Bridge. And there's it's kind of like the same idea. The guy just outlined, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, you're doing that wrong. Stop doing that, you'll get better. And everyone loved this book. So
that's awesome. No, I love that. No, and I mean, it's all stuff I want my readers to have anyway, or my friends in general, because this is the stuff I can't give people my experience of growing up as a card player, but I can give you when I was 19 years old and an old vet said, look, kid, this is what you're doing wrong. If you fix this, you're going to have something that you can work with. And of course, you can't give quite the gravitas of that moment and maybe the emotional investment, but I can put the exact words. A lot of these guys did teach me, and they said, you can tell anyone you want. Most people won't apply it. Most people want to play poker because they want to see the flops. And if we're being perfectly honest, people play poker to relax. And when you're waiting to see what comes out on the flop, you're not thinking about your day at work. You're not thinking about maybe some issues going on in other areas of your life. It's the same thing when you do a call on the river. Anything can happen at that moment. It's really exciting. It's just like any other table game. Most people will want to do that. But if you can just apply a few of these things, you're going to be doing much, much better.
Okay, now obviously we're all looking forward to this book coming out and what you've got to say about all these things that people do wrong. Give us a little spoiler. Tell us, like, maybe just identify like a couple of things that are going to form maybe a kind of big topic, without giving the whole game away so that people don't buy the book, because we want people to buy the book. But just as a little spoiler, just tell us a couple of things that that are really, in all the work you've done with all your students, you think, oh my God, not this one again. Everyone does this. That kind of reaction from you.
Well, the three mistakes I can think of off the top of my head that I see people just give away money all the time is, one of the things that's very interesting, if you look at theoretically what people are supposed to be doing from the big blind, what hands they're supposed to be defending, how much they're supposed to be check raising post flop, how much pressure they're supposed to be putting against your C-bet, nobody is anywhere near that. Nobody has any idea. And many times when people call a 3x raise or a 3.5x raise from the big blind, they're doing it with the same hands they'd call a 2x raise with. Now, obviously, it takes some observation to figure out who that is, but sometimes a guy will sit down at the table and he's a very jovial guy. He tells you he works in another industry, and this is a guy who wants to see some flops. The second you sit down at that table, that guy is your most important guy. He might be a nice guy. You might be friends away from the table, but your job is to take as many of his chips as humanly possible, because by level 4 or 5, this person likely is going to lose 50, 60% of their stack. And at that point, they can't gamble up anymore. Those chips should go to you. So the first thing you got to do when you sit down at the table, you find that person, and then you find out how to get them involved out of position. The easiest way to do this is when they're in the big blind. So you got to start looking to the players to your left. Are they paying attention? Are they watching the hockey game? Are they on their cell phone? Are they watching you? How comfortable are they when they fold? Do they really, really want to play every time you open, or do they seem to play a fixed range? If you see somebody has a very fixed strategy, you can open up your game a little bit, because it's going to be a little while before they adjust. If they really seem to be paying attention to you, now you have to figure out ways to clear that lane. Will they just fold if you make it 3.5x? Maybe really early on, if the person keeps 3-betting you, how do they react the first time you 4-bet you, assuming you have a hand that can do something like that? And you got to start looking to get, sometimes there will be 3 of these guys at a table, and it's Christmas. There's times I went and just played a World Poker Tour event in Choctaw, and I had 2 guys to my left that were just hammering me with 3-bets all day. And there were guys at other tables that had all these people that would call them in the big blind and give them chips. And they're on their phone. They're watching TV. They're not doing anything. That's the biggest thing you could do, is just look for the guys who are playing for fun, get them involved out of position, realize they're playing very fit or fold post flop. And that is very, very far from what they should be doing. The other thing that comes up consistently is if you have someone, a lot of people when they play poker, they want to see the flop. And they've learned that if they limp in, somebody's really likely to raise them. But they've actually discovered something really, which to be fair to them, it does work quite a bit, is if they raise, most people are afraid to 3-bet. So if they want to see the flop, they just make it 2x. The problem is they want to see the flop all the time. So they'll have a 6-4 of diamonds. You know, they're under the gun +2. They're a little bored. It's been a couple of hours. So they just go ahead and open. It is your job to re-raise those people. And that is, you know, that can get a little uncomfortable, and you want to make sure you do it mostly from the cutoff and the button, but you do have to get out there a little bit. Now, a lot of people struggle with this, because if you 3-bet a couple of times, c-bet a couple of times, and it doesn't work out, people at the table might have something to say about it. They want to see flops. They want to have a good time, and you're interrupting that, but you have to just go ahead and deal with it. I find talking with people is really good. I always just go like, I had ace queen, I missed, or something, right? Just some way to help them save face. That really works. And one that I would give also, let's say you have a really good player to your left and you raise from the hijack and they call you from the cutoff and everybody folds. You should be shutting down on a lot of flops, because a lot of really good players will only cold call you with pretty good pairs, pretty good suited broadways, pretty good suited connectors. So if that board comes coordinated at all, you just got to kind of let it go a lot of the time. And I see guys all the time when they're playing, they'll c-bet there. Now, if you have plans for later streets, you have, you know, something like a check raise in your back pocket under the turn or river. I'm not that adventurous, but okay, that's an argument. But if you just continuation bet into a range that's mostly pairs that aren't going to fold, and then you check give up on the turn, that's a lot of money that's going to add up over the years. So you want to make sure you're checking a little bit more. Don't worry about check folding. And then sometimes if the guy's just going to go ahead and get used to betting into you all the time when you check, don't be afraid to check raise a really good top pair and see if he'll call you all the way down. See if you can get some extreme value out of that. If you apply those 3 things, that right there will help you make a lot more money.
That's great. That's really interesting. I remember one thing. I mean, I'm going to tell you something back about one of your books. And if I don't get it 100% right, then obviously please correct me. But I remember, I think it was probably from the Myth book, that you said like the only way really to exploit a loose raiser is by 3-betting. You can't exploit them by calling. And the only way to exploit a loose 3-better is by 4-betting. It's like the only way to like fight against loose aggression is with more aggression yourself. I think you'd come to this conclusion from studying like massive databases with all of this this information. Does that still hold, and is this something that players are still getting wrong?
Well, the thing that happens is you're almost forced into a raise, because what happens when you cold call someone And if you want to make a grown man cry, bring up his database and take a look at his cold calls from any position that's not the button. Oftentimes they're losing much more than if they had just folded. And what you end up seeing is when someone cold calls, that can present a problem, because what ends up happening is that more players are going to get involved behind, which is okay. Sometimes a hand will do very well in a multi-way pot, but other times there's an issue, especially in tournament poker. If someone has 20 or 30 big blinds and they shove behind you, you're losing. If you called a 2.5x raise and then you just folded, that's 250 big blinds every 100 times that happens. You got to be pretty damn good post flop in order to make up for that. And you need also to be aware of people who are 3-betting behind you, because that's another way you'll never see the flop if somebody's going to squeeze against you. So what ends up happening is a lot of times you get squeezed on and then you lose all the money. A lot of times you get shoved on and you lose all the money. And that can be divided between cash games and tournaments. Both of those come up quite a bit. And another thing that happens is you'll cold call, and then a bunch of other people cold call. And now it's going to be very, very difficult to bluff post flop, because most likely someone has something. Now, one thing you can do is, if these players are incapable of folding a pair to the first bet in that multi-way pot, you can bet really, really big on the flop, or overbet even, if you think that's going to get through. Or excuse me, if you think they're going to call that. But you don't see a lot of people doing that. So what ends up happening is, when the pot gets really big multi-way, usually the winning hand is going to be better than one pair. But you see a lot of people with a king queen offsuit or an ace jack offsuit consent to these multi-way pots, and those hands only make one pair. So realistically, once the pot gets very big, their hand is not good, and the pots they win tend to be very small. And that's assuming they don't even get bluffed off the hand pre-flop. So it has nothing to do with a lot of really good pre-flop players back in the day used to make a lot of money just cold calling, because somebody would make a garbage pair and they had a way of manipulating you with bet sizes or maybe table talk or something to get you to call a lot of money off. Many players now are a little bit more educated and they know not to play a big pot without a big hand. So it's going to be really difficult to make money with a call.
Okay. Another thing that's interesting, another thing I'd like to ask you is, what would you say in general? Obviously, you've dealt with thousands of students, as you're well known as, one of the most active coaches in the world, if not the most active. What would you say is, without going into a specific detail, what's the most common area where people are making mistakes? Is it like the pre-flop play, what they do on the flop, not paying attention to stacks? I don't know. What's like the area where they leak really badly?
It's actually, that's a really good question, which, so something that really confused me was I was successful in poker from the time I was a teenager, and I had no idea why that was, to be honest with you, because I would play with poker players who were far more intelligent than I was, who were far more talented than I was. They would just look at guys and they know if they'd had them, if they had the hand. But I was consistently paying my bills. I wasn't doing much better than that, and I lived in a very not a nice place at that time, but I was paying my bills. And these folks who were much more talented, much more intelligent, much better poker players, much more experienced, were not making money. And I finally figured out what it was, which was they couldn't fold. Everybody else knows at that time I really needed the money, so I was pretty damn good at folding. It wasn't because I was smart enough to fold. I just had no choice, right? There was a lot of hands I wanted to play, but I go, I don't know if I can pay my rent if I play this hand. So I'll stick to my aces, kings, queens, jacks, and tens. Thank you very much. Whereas if you think about it, everybody can raise. We all have seen players who really love to raise and be the center of attention. Everybody can call. We know everybody wants to see flops. Yet the vast majority of these players do not beat the rake when it comes to poker games. The one guy you don't see at most poker tables is the guy who can fold, the guy who's just got an iron will and can sit there for a long time. That's why when I was playing on the West Coast, there was a lot of Vietnamese immigrants that did really well at the games. And that's because they had an iron will. They knew the money was good there. The money meant a lot to them because USD was so big in their currency when they sent it back home. So they really worked hard and they were capable of folding in some situations. I didn't have that gear. But if you can learn, pre-flop is the big one. Pre-flop, because let's say you have pocket threes. Let's do a tournament situation. You have pocket threes. Somebody makes it 2.5x. You have 33 big blinds and you're in the hijack. If you got a couple of people who can move all in behind you, you got to really rethink cold calling there, because a lot of times you're not even going to see the flop. You're really thin right there as far as set minding odds. You got to ask, is the first guy even going to pay me if he doesn't hit that well? How much is he opening? How often does he miss? And a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of the time, you're going to want to fold there. But the reason nobody does it is if you fold there and then the button calls and then the big blind calls and the board comes ace, king, 3, or it gives you your set. Nobody can handle that, because that's not something humans can deal with. That really hurts. The only guy who can typically deal with that is the guy who really, really needs the money. And then I actually lost that gear as I started becoming more successful, and I started struggling quite a bit because I didn't know how to fold anymore. And I had to relearn that. If you can be patient and pay attention, you will do fine in no limit hold'em. But the problem is being patient is so difficult.
Okay, that's interesting. I suppose that applies more to live poker, because if you're playing online, you can play as many tables as you want, and patience isn't such an issue. So
yeah,
I guess that's maybe one of the elements why the online play is so much tougher than live play. That people don't tend to be as splashy as they are in.
That's very true. If you're playing a lot of tables, you can go away. The hard part becomes when you have a really soft tournament and you should focus on it online, and now you got to play very patient, but there's no stimuli. There's nothing going on. It's all just beeps and boops. And, then it becomes a little bit more difficult. But you're right. With multi-tabling, yes, it's easier.
Okay, the next thing I'd like to ask you is, obviously in the last, maybe 3, 4, 5 years, the big thing in poker, I think, is GTO, and everyone's talking about GTO, and everyone's playing with solvers and analyzing. So what's your take on that? I mean, you work with, guys who like to just play for a bit of fun or something. I mean, do they need to get involved in this, or is this just something that the elite players deal with, or does it help anybody? What's your take on it?
That's a really good question. So a lot of people think just because I wrote a book about exploitative play that I don't like GTO. That couldn't be further than the truth, because I really am just a fan of playing poker. I don't watch poker as much as maybe I should on television or something like that, but I really do love playing cards. And a lot of the theoretical frameworks have a lot to do with the games you play. Now, a long time ago, I understood that I do much better with the average American player, because I grew up in the United States. I understand how Americans think. I know what sets them off, and I can get them to call really, really big overbets in situations that maybe theoretically they know what they should do, but at this exact moment, they're not going to follow that. Now, that takes a different approach to the game. So one of the people I talk to the most about poker, Carlos Welch, really focuses on exploitative poker quite a bit. And the sites I like to play on a lot of the time will be anonymous sites that have a lot of American poker players. So it's super exploitative stuff going on because they don't even know who I am. That being said, if your focus is on other professionals, and on some of these big international sites, even the low stakes games have a lot of professionals, a lot of working professionals out of Brazil or Eastern Europe or whatnot. The theoretical framework is excellent. GTO is excellent because it will give you points of exploitation. I don't think I've worked with a number of GTO coaches because it's really important to stay fresh. It's really important to get new ideas. Otherwise you get stale, and there's always guys at the card room that think their game from 6 years ago should still work, dang it. And it's not going so hot. And I'm just very terrified of becoming one of those people. So I'll hire these guys to tell me about it. And the thing I've noticed is I don't think I've met a GTO player who doesn't exploit their opponents. I think they're very, very good at the thing I've noticed they get really good at is if they're playing with some of the wilder players that are capable of turning pairs into a bluff and whatnot, they're much better at going, okay, this is the minimum number of hands I have to defend with. Whereas a lot of the exploitative players will just be completely lost. And so in those more aggressive games, they fold a little too much or call a little too much. They don't really know where to draw that line. But where GTO really has helped me quite a bit is I'll ask someone, one of the guys who helps me, okay, theoretically, what is the guy supposed to be doing here? Then they'll explain they're supposed to check raise these hands, they're supposed to do this, they're supposed to do that bet size. If that is way off what I see in my databases, that is a point of interest. That is something I really have to look at. And some of the best exploitative plays I've ever come up with have come from a GTO coach really helping me. Now, would I profess to really understand GTO on a level that these elite players have? No, I would think I would like to think I've used the lessons I've gotten from much, much better players to explore more exploitative plays and to become more proficient at the games I'm actually playing. But if you are to play against mostly professionals, or if you are to play with high stakes games, the new poker software, and some of them generate quizzes. A lot of the solutions it comes up with, they're very interesting. I think it could really, really help a lot of those players.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much, Alex. Well, I'd like to wrap this up quite soon. So obviously I'd like to tell the viewers that Alex, as well as writing books for us, is not the only thing that Alex does. He's a professional player, but he does tons of coaching and puts out loads of content for the people who follow him and follow his work. So perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit about that, plus anything else that you'd like to wrap up with.
That's pretty much it. The thing, if you guys enjoyed this interview and you like what I'm saying about poker, go to pokerheadrush.com. So I had this idea years ago that I thought would be really fun. And something about work is if you can have fun with it, your work ethic will follow. If it's not fun, it's a little tougher to do. So I said, this sounds really fun, so I'm going to try to do it. What I do is I have a daily newsletter about poker training. It's myself and my friends every single day. We'll send you an email about poker, how you can get better. I try to make the emails about 5 minutes in length, maybe 10 minutes. A lot of times there's videos if you like video. There's a lot of quizzes if you like quizzes. There's articles if you like articles. Sometimes I'll put out an hour-long lesson if you've ever wanted to get an hour-long lesson, a theoretical lesson. But most of it is stuff that on your break at work, you can get better at your poker game. So every day you can try to do something new. You can try to learn something new. You can quiz and get better. If you want to sign up for that mailing list, go to pokerheadrush.com.
Okay, that's great. And I would like to add one other thing. I've worked all my life in like publishing and books, and I've read a lot of stuff. So I really like writing. I'm always reading stuff. And one thing, the only way that I judge good writing is if somebody has written a sentence, do I want to read the next one? You know, that's the only criteria I have. I don't care how well crafted it is, how intelligent it looks, what qualifications the author has. Is that an interesting sentence? And do I want to read the next one? And with Alex's work, it's kind of like 99% of the time, it's yes, that's interesting. I want to see what's coming after that. And that's why I really like working with you and putting your stuff out, because it's just kind of like always interesting, and you're always kind of like drawing the reader in. So I very much encourage, like you said, pokerheadrush.com, people to go there and sign up so they can get your content, and obviously to buy your books, and also to get the next one that's coming out. So thanks very much for chatting to us, Alex, and we're looking forward to seeing what's coming up in your next book, which we'll be publishing early in 2022.
I'm super excited. Thank you for having me today.
Okay, that's been brilliant. Thanks a lot, Alex, and look forward to seeing the stuff, like I said.
Yes, sir.